Going to shift gears now, and again, we're going to look at spinal nerves. Um, and again, typically after I introduce all the main spinal cords, spinal nerves you're responsible for, we'd be working with all the models and this and that. But instead, I'll send you to pictures, and I still got to create content to figure out exactly how we're going to work on the lab part. Like, for instance, what do right, let me actually, I can show you here. Like I'm currently in the process of I'm in Photoshop trying to kind of create images from like the models that we normally would use in labs, so you could recognize different nerves, from these things that, on files, like image files. But then if we do, and hopefully we do end up back in lab, and you're going to have to start recognizing things actually back on the models and things like that, you'll still be familiar with what they look like on the models, because you'll have been studying them and recognizing different nerves from pictures that I've adapted from the models. So I'm trying to make this relatively like seamless. So, and again, I don't know for sure if we're getting back in, but it seems like, a month and a half, or a month and I think a month and 2 weeks from now, there's no way. I think some of the stuff they're talking about is idiotic. But a month from now, I think it's more likely we might be getting back into class. So I'm still keeping my fingers crossed. So let's head back to the whiteboard. All right. So first, we're going to talk about how a spinal nerve actually arises from the spinal cord. So here's the spinal cord. So this is, again, a cross section of the spinal cord with our ventral and dorsal horns. So obviously, this is going to be posterior here. This is going to be anterior here. Different sections of the spinal cord look a little different. Don't worry, you're not going to be responsible for recognizing what level of the spinal cord you're at. As we get a little deeper into the autonomic nervous system a little later, we're going to find, in addition to the ventral horn and the dorsal horn, there's something that they call lateral horns, which are actually more motor stuff, but from the autonomic motor, sympathetic motor. So maybe I'll put that in parentheses right now. We're going to talk about this later. Don't worry about it right now. This is going to be the lateral horn. It's only going to be in the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. This is going to be sympathetic motor. But I'm putting it in parentheses. Don't think about it right now. All right, so we talked about how the ventral horn is going to be motor. So we have these motor neurons here. They're going to be sending their axons out to the body. So this is all efferent, sending signals out. This place where the axons leave the spinal cord and start creating the nerve, This is going to be called the ventral root. So the ventral root is just the axons that are leaving the spinal cord from the ventral horn. So, and these again are going to be motor, so they're leaving. Similarly, you're going to have a dorsal root. The dorsal root is going to be the sensory signals that are arriving at the coming in. So this is going to be sensory. Is going to be sensory signals that are coming in into this way. So this is going this way. For these, so for the motor, the cell bodies are actually here inside the gray matter, and then the axons are leaving. For the sensory ones coming in, these are going to be examples of these unipolar neurons. If you remember, there were 3 main structural forms of neurons. We talked about multipolar, which was kind of the classic one. That there was bipolar, and then unipolar that were kind of like a lollipop with a big axon moving along. So each of these, this is the cell body of the neuron, and then it has the fiber that start from some sensory receptor and end up coming in. So this collection of all the cell bodies here, of these unipolar neurons, which are right here, this is going to be called the dorsal root here, because we're right near, we're coming, this is the axons connecting into the dorsal horn. Does anybody remember what we call a collection of neuron cell bodies outside the brain and spinal cord?
They're called ganglia.
Exactly.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, you're totally, you
Sorry.
got it. So no, you got it. It's ganglion. So this collection of unipolar neuron cell bodies that are facilitating all the sensory signals coming into the spinal cord, this puppy is called the dorsal root ganglion. And you've already seen this. You've seen this under the microscope. When you looked at ganglia under the microscope, where you saw, the fact that, in fact, I wonder if let me look on my, doobie-doo, hold on one second here. It's not showing it. But basically, the dorsal root ganglion was the thing that had like the large neuron cells with all the little satellite cells around. If you remember that from under the microscope when we were doing like nerve tissue. So the dorsal root ganglion you've actually seen under the microscope already. And again, it's the cell bodies of each of these. Each neuron is looks like a lollipop cell body on a big long axon carrying messages from the sensory. So I'm going to take this and redraw it prettier now. So we have, this is my ventral root. This is the motor signals leaving. Maybe I'll do a different color here. Here's my dorsal root ganglion with all the signals that are coming in.
This meeting is being recorded.
So I did remember to record this. Wait, somebody needs to stop. Let me, all right, that was Elsa. I just muted you, Elsa. So if you need to talk, you can unmute yourself. Let's see. So we have, this is my dorsal root here, which is just where the sensory signals are entering in. This is the ventral root where the motor signals are leaving. And then they all bundle together. So I'm trying to draw this showing that where they mix together here, this thing together is my spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve is both sensory and motor together. You know, it arises from the motor, which is leaving through the ventral root, as well as the sensory that is arriving in the dorsal root. And they mix together and become this bundle of axons. Again, a nerve is just a bundle of axons, and it's both sensory and motor bundled together, which is going to then zip around to different places in the body. There's a fatter part of it that goes towards the front called the ventral ramus. And then a smaller branch that goes backward called the dorsal ramus. So these are the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves, and they're leaving between the little gaps, those intervertebral foramina between successive vertebrae, and they get named based on what level of the spinal cord they're leaving. So you have spinal nerves called C1, C2, C3, C4. You have spinal nerves called T1, T2, T3. So you have sacral spinal nerves. You have lumbar spinal nerves, depending on what level of the spinal cord that they're leaving. So does this make sense, this basic idea that you have axons leaving with motor signals, axons entering with sensory signals, and they bundle together to become a mixed sensory and motor cable of axons that leave at a specific level of the spinal cord, and some of those move towards the front of the body and some of them move towards the back of the body. So that's that. And now what we're going to do is just look at specific ones coming out. And so I'm going to erase this. Here's the brain. And you have the spine, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the cervical vertebrae, right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 thoracic vertebrae. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lumbar vertebrae. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sacral vertebrae. So these are all the vertebrae here. And then coming out from the little gaps in between, you have nerves, spinal nerves. And again, it's that mix of both motor and sensory that is coming in and out from the ventral and dorsal roots at that level of the spinal cord. The naming gets a little weird. The first spinal nerve that comes out is called C1, and the next one is called C2. But because of this kind of gap between the skull and the first cervical vertebrae, this actually goes C1 through C8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And these are named after vertebra below. Except for obviously C8. There is no C8 vertebrae below. It's actually T1, below it. And then the next ones are the thoracic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then we have T1 through T12. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have L1 through L5. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have S1 through S5. And all of these are named after the vertebra above. So I don't know why. This is another one of these things where I feel like I should apologize to you guys that whoever came up with this system made it like confusing, but that's the way it is. But so this is how we name the different cervical spinal nerves, thoracic spinal nerves, lumbar spinal nerves, sacral spinal nerves. And some of them, the ones that come out along the back, just kind of stay kind of in strips along your body. In fact, I can show this to you right now. Give me 1 second here. I am Doobie-doo, come on. Here it is. All right, I'm going to share. Yes. So like these are called dermatomes. This is like parts of your skin that are innervated by, let me get my little, where's my, oh, I need to, hold on, slideshow from current slide. So if I go into my little pointer, like, this level here is innervated by, the sensory signals. If you touch somebody right along here, the signal would be going into their spinal cord at the level of spinal nerve T1. Along their back, you can see everything is just in nice little strips, basically. Or in the thoracic region of the spinal cord, basically kind of comes out to the thoracic region of your body in little strips. But the arms and the legs have what they arise from these things called plexuses, like lots of different nerves kind of tangle up to make these nerves that go down the legs and go down the arms. Like, the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is actually made up of a bunch of different nerves that are arising from the sacral plexus, what we call. So what we're going to do now is look at what are called the nerve plexuses. So the nerve plexuses are going to be, let me see if I can, yeah, I can show you like right here. Like here's like the sacral plexus. You have a bunch of spinal nerves that leave the sacral level of the spinal cord here, but then they get all kind of tangled up and they make these major nerves coming down the back of your leg. Here we have the lumbar plexus. The lumbar plexus are these nerves, spinal nerves that are leaving from the lumbar region of the spinal cord, but then they get all kind of braided together and making these other nerves going down the front of your leg. Here, this is where we're going to find the brachial plexus. There's going to be a bunch of nerves that leave right here from mostly the cervical level and beginning thoracic level of your spinal cord, and they make all these different nerves that are going to go down your arm. It's going to be called the brachial plexus. So that's what I'm going to do now. It's going to be kind of the last thing we're going to talk about today is, in addition to talking about, yes, there are cervical, you know, spinal nerves, but then those kind of get all entwined with each other to create these other nerves that have names, like the radial nerve, the musculocutaneous nerve, the ulnar nerve, the median nerve. And those arise from combinations of these different cervical spinal nerves. So, and those are going to be the nerves that have names that you need to know. Like when we talk about, oh, what nerve innervates the biceps brachii muscle? You're going to have to know, like, oh, it's the musculocutaneous nerve. Or like, what nerve is innervating the rectus femoris nerve on the front of your thigh? And, that's going to be this femoral nerve coming from the lumbar plexus. So you're going to have to learn some of the main nerves that come out of these plexuses. So that's what we're going to do right now. We can start right here. So here, this is what we call the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus, so it's arising here from cervical spinal nerve C1 through C5. As you can see, there's a bunch of different nerves that come out of here. There's only one nerve from the cervical plexus that you are responsible for. The only one you are responsible for is this dude, the phrenic nerve. Maybe let me get my phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve is the one that goes down. Does anybody know what the phrenic nerve innervates? Anybody have an idea?
Vegas.
I'll give you a hint. If you cut your spinal cord above where the phrenic nerve originates, you're gonna die. It operates. It's the diaphragm. So this innervates the diaphragm. Right. So if if you have some, like right here, so basically C3 through C5 are the ones that give rise to the phrenic nerve. In fact, I can give you like the goofy little thing people talk about. So from the cervical plexus, you get the diaphragm. Well, you get the phrenic nerve, I should say. Phrenic nerve, which innervates the diaphragm. And this is derived from C3 through C5. So if you cut your spinal cord above C3, which means there's no messages coming from, remember we talked about those brainstem areas, the pons and medulla are operating your basic respiratory functions. If you're not sending a message down the phrenic nerve to your diaphragm, you're going to stop breathing, so you'll die. So people say, like, C3 through 5, keep you alive, right? So if you, if you have like, Christopher Reeve, like that dude, the Superman actor, had that his horse riding accident. You know, if he hadn't ended up on a respirator like immediately, he would have died, because unless you have something artificially keeping you breathing, um, you're not gonna live very long if you don't have messages coming down your phrenic nerve. It's probably particularly bad in like kind of COVID-19 time when there's not enough respirators going around. So careful not to damage your spinal cord above C3 right now. In general, don't be careful. But from the cervical plexus, only one you need to know is the phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve is particularly important because any spinal cord injury above C3 means you're not sending messages to your diaphragm and you're going to stop ventilating. And that's obviously catastrophic. So that is the easy plexus, because there's just one thing. You don't have to think about it too much. Now we're going to go and we're going to look at the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus is, it is the most complicated of all of them in terms of you having to kind of understand the details of it. Even though ultimately you just are going to need to be able to recognize like the musculocutaneous nerve versus the ulnar nerve versus the median nerve. When you're just looking at these things coming down the arm, you really can't tell which is which unless you go back up to the origin and see how they arise. Like, ultimately, they make this very kind of distinctive pattern that we're going to talk about in a few moments. And ultimately you're gonna start looking and say, oh, there's that M, and there I know that thing coming out of the middle of the M is the median nerve. So you're following this up. It's like, oh my God, that's got to be the median nerve. And I know the median nerve is doing my flexor carpi radialis. But unless you know this kind of detail up here, like on a test, I would never ask you like, name the middle versus the lower trunk, or this chord or that chord. However, you probably are going to end up having to learn those trunks and chords, because understanding this plexus, this kind of way that these cervical nerves rearrange, is how you're going to be able to look a little further down the arm and actually recognize which of these nerves you're actually looking at. So I am going to take this thing that probably looks pretty confusing here and try to make it a little less confusing for you right now. And I will say, after we're done with the brachial plexus, the other plexuses are going to be way simpler. When we get to the lumbar plexus here, you don't have to worry about this at all. All you need to know is obturator nerve comes down through the obturator foramen and the femoral nerve comes out down the front of the thigh. When we get to the sacral plexus, you're not going to have to remember all the crazy entanglements. You just need to know the main thing coming down the back is the sciatic nerve, which branches into the fibular and tibial nerve. And then there's going to be the pudendal nerve, which is the one that goes into your genitals here. So even though the brachial plexus is going to probably feel kind of overwhelming, don't get worried that the other plexuses are going to be just as crazy. The other ones are going to be much easier. You don't have to learn all the crazy entanglement. So just to kind of, that way you don't kind of panic as we get started here. So to the whiteboard. Da, 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 da. Okay. I'm going to do my best to make this make sense. So we're going to start with some spinal nerves, C3, C6, C7, C8, and T1. So this is coming off of the spinal cord. And these are these spinal nerves, which are at each, coming out at each of these levels. And again, these are the spinal nerves that are going to create the brachial plexus. Again, so maybe I should say what we're talking about right now is the brachial plexus. Even though it's arising mainly from cervical nerves, it's called brachial plexus because it's going to make all the nerves that go down your arm. All right. The first thing that happens is these create trunks. So this is going to be so the first thing are going to be trunks. And let me use a smaller, so this is going to be my superior trunk. Middle trunk, and inferior trunk. Like I said, you're not going to actually be tested on superior, middle, inferior trunk, but kind of understanding how this is working is going to help you recognize which nerve is which further downstream as you go down the arm. All right, so now each of these trunks is going to have a split, one that stays anterior towards the front of the arm and another that goes to the posterior. So now we're going to have anterior and posterior divisions. So maybe I'll keep red anterior. And then maybe I'll do green will be the posterior divisions. And all of the three posterior divisions kind of come together to become what's called the posterior cord. When you're looking at models or you're looking at pictures, or you're looking at a real brachial plexus, you can see that it goes behind, that these other things are in front. So when I'm drawing it like this, kind of showing how, the red thing obviously is in front because you can't, hopefully this is kind of clear. This is supposed to show that this green thing is behind these anterior divisions. So we're going to follow this posterior cord in a few moments. Now we're going to look at the anterior divisions. The anterior divisions, one continues forward, joins with the middle division, and it's going to become what's called the lateral cord. Lateral cord, if you're thinking about the arm, think about this is kind of staying on this is going to be on the outside of the arm, the lateral part of the arm. And then the inferior part here, maybe I'll do another color, on a blue. This is going to become the medial cord. Medial, so make sure you don't get confused, but we're going to talk about median in just a second. So here are the three chords. This is important to kind of keep track of. There's this posterior chord, which got created by these posterior divisions that all went behind. The lateral chord, which is more staying on the lateral side of the arm, and then this medial chord, which is going more on the inside of the arm. And now we can actually talk about the nerves that have names that you need to know. So the lateral chord kind of keeps on going. And this is going to become what's called the musculocutaneous nerve. The musculocutaneous nerve is the one that is going to do all of the flexors of your upper arm. So musculocutaneous nerve is going to do what kind of muscles? What flexor muscles do you have in your upper arm here?
Flexor muscles. I have biceps brachii.
Right, like biceps brachii. What's another important flexor muscle up there?
Brachialis.
Brachialis. Yeah, exactly. So, like on an exam, there could be like some question about, musculocutaneous nerve could come up on a picture of nerves and ask you what's the name of this nerve and tell me like a muscle that's innervated by this nerve. Or, now that, because everything is ultimately cumulative, I could have just a model of an arm with muscles with a sticker on biceps brachii, and the question might be, what nerve innervates the muscle with the sticker on it? And you'd have to know. So when you think about these nerves, you want to recognize how to recognize them, but also make sure you kind of keep track of where or what they connect to, like what muscles and things that they actually innervate. And obviously, since we've talked about everything being sensory and motor, it's also bringing messages from the skin and the senses coming in as well. The medial cord continues on and is going to become the ulnar nerve. So to Haley, yes. So in the flexors in the upper arm, though, we're going to talk of this flexors in the lower arm that are going to be different. So musculocutaneous is flexors in the upper arm. So ulnar nerve is going to go and actually do some of the lower arm flexors. This is going to do like flexor carpi ulnaris. It's also going to do the medial part of flexor digitorum superficialis. And then there's one other nerve that is going to, maybe I'll do it in green. So it comes off of the lateral cord and the medial cord, and it becomes what's called the median nerve. So I remember getting confused about this when I was first learning this. Median, you think of the median's the thing that goes down the middle. So medial cord is the cord towards the inside, medial. Lateral cord is the cord that's towards the outside, lateral. Median nerve is the nerve that's kind of going down, making the divider in between the two. And this kind of M shape is going to be something that you're going to be able to notice when in fact, I can go back to the like right here. This is kind of showing that M, where you have the lateral cord becoming the musculocutaneous, the medial cord becoming the ulnar nerve, and then this little M kind of thing, or W, depending what direction you're looking, that's coming down to become the median nerve down the middle between the two. So this is something you're going to be looking for when you're trying to figure out which is the median versus which is the ulnar versus which is the musculocutaneous, is you kind of look for this junction here, and then you'll be able to tell which is which. And if we look here, you can also see going behind is, in green on this, you have the posterior cord is going to create the axillary nerve, which goes under your arm. It's going to be doing like the deltoid muscle, your shoulder here. It's also going to become the radial nerve, which goes and basically does all the extensors along the back of your arm. So, oh shoot, I think I've lost my other picture now, so I can't really go back to it. So basically, like if this is your arm, and we had the lateral cord and the medial cord, and then behind that was kind of the posterior cord. Lateral is going to continue to be musculocutaneous. Medial is going to continue to be the ulnar. These two make that kind of M. It becomes the median nerve. Musculocutaneous is doing the upper arm flexors. The kind of silly mnemonic people use is median does most of the forearm flexors. Like flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, things like that. Except the ulnar, so it says like, the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle says like FCU, I want my own nerve, so it gets the ulnar nerve. So you can, whatever trick you want to remember. Ulnar nerve is mainly flexor carpi ulnaris, as well as the medial portion of the flexor digitorum, but the other forearm flexors are median nerve. The posterior cord goes behind, it becomes axillary nerve, which goes under your arm, does again deltoid. I think Terry's, I should double check. Doobie-doo. Yeah, teres minor and deltoid muscle. And then radial nerve, basically all the extensors. So it's going to do triceps brachii, it's going to do extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi radialis, and all that kind of stuff. The only exception, radial nerve actually does do one flexor. What is the one flexor that actually is on the radial side here? This big, actually, what's the big?
Brachioradialis.
Yeah, brachioradialis is actually done by radial nerve. So it's the exception that proves the rule. In general, though, it's doing all the extensors. So the radial nerve, like anytime you see if you saw a sticker on any of the extensor muscles, either on the upper or lower arm, it's pretty much going to be from the radial nerve. So that is the brachial plexus. Are there any questions about the brachial plexus?
I'm a little confused between the axillary and the radial. Is the axillary also all extensors, or does it have different? I might miss
No, it's the one, it goes to your deltoid as well as teres minor. So it goes to muscles that are up near your armpit there.
Thank you.
Again, if I go back to this here, so this is what it looks like in real life. You know, and I can show you, this is actually, I think, near the beginning. These are kind of these cool, so like if you have median nerve damage, right? The median nerve is doing, you know, like flexor carpi radialis. And what happens is flexor carpi radialis is going to be the, you know, flexing the fingers on this side of your hand. And if it's not working, then the extensors aren't being balanced. So the fingers kind of, you know, end up coming up, hand of benediction, like you're the Pope praying over somebody. Radial nerve injury, here, all of the extensors are no longer working, so the flexors are not balanced, so you end up having this wrist drop because these muscles still have tension, but the extensors don't have tension. Ulnar nerve, you get this thing called claw hand. It's basically the pinky ones. It's kind of like this, except the pinky fingers are the ones that are kind of up rather than the kind of index and middle fingers that are up. So depending on which nerve gets damaged, and you definitely get, I've had students who've had nerve damage in their arm that totally had this stuff going on. So clinical application, yeah. What else here? This is just kind of showing, you know, how the parts of the skin, it's not just operating muscles, it's also getting sensory from the skin, but it's, you know, ulnar nerve is mainly more near the pinky side. And I should say the ulnar nerve is going right behind the medial epicondyle of your humerus. So that's like something we can all do actually. If you like medial epicondyle, you go to the bottom of your upper arm and you got that big knob. Let me stop sharing here. So we could just be like me on here, like on the inside of your upper arm at the bottom, there's that big knob, the medial epicondyle. If you kind of go right behind there and dig your fingers in, you're actually going to be compressing the ulnar nerve, and you should feel the pinky side of your hand get all weird and tingly. Do people feel that? Like kind of dig in right behind the medial epicondyle.
Yeah.
So that is because you are stimulating that ulnar nerve, which is carrying sensory information from the pinky side of your hand. So, and that's also what you'd call like your funny bone. When you whack it and you get that weird tingle, that's the funny bone is actually the ulnar nerve, which is kind of accessible there in that little crevasse. All right, so the other two plexuses are going to go way, way faster because there's not so much to them. And then we're going to be done with new material here. So let's do that. Share content. Whiteboard. Okay, lumbar plexus and sacral plexus. So neither of these, you don't need to know the details like we saw in the last for the brachial plexus. So this is going to be much more straightforward. The lumbar kind of originates from L1 to L4. There's only two nerves that you need to know that come from the lumbar plexus. One is the femoral nerve. So the femoral nerve is the one that comes to the front of the thigh. And these are basically going to be your extensors, your thigh extensors. So what are the muscles that are operated by this femoral nerve?
Quadriceps.
Yeah, exactly, the quadriceps. These are going to be the quads. Yeah. So I don't know, so extensors like the quads. The other nerve you need to know that comes from here is the obturator nerve. And this is going to go through that obturator foramen. To the inner thigh. Heck. So if you have something going to the inner thigh, what are the muscles in the inside of your thigh? What do they all do?
Adduct.
Yeah, so this is going to be all the adductors. You know, if you're looking at a model or a picture and you're trying to recognize the femoral nerve or the obturator nerve, if you see that it's originating from the lumbar region of the spinal cord and it's going along the front of the thigh, it's the femoral nerve. If it's originating from the lumbar region of the spinal cord and it's going through the obturator foramen to the inner thigh, it's the obturator nerve. There are other nerves and stuff, but these are the only two that you need to know from the lumbar plexus. For the sacral plexus, there's only, so we're going to have one as a sciatic nerve. This is going to be the back of the thigh. So, and this is actually going to split into tibial and fibular nerves. So tibial, and don't worry about the real details, like depending what book you read, like if you're talking about the hamstring, sometimes it'll just say it's the sciatic nerve, sometimes it'll say specifically one or the other of the tibial fibular nerves. You can just think about the sciatic nerve as kind of the thing operating the hamstrings, and then the tibial and fibular nerves are then going to go down on either side of the lower leg. And then the other nerve that originates from the sacral plexus, and the last nerve that you need to know, pudendal nerve. And again, what does pudendal mean? Anybody remember? Maybe we haven't used it yet.
Nope.
So it comes from the root for shameful. So it's kind of ridiculous. It's actually pretty sad. So this is what is innervating the genitals. And in fact, even in modern books, external female genitalia is the vulva. But if you look at old books, they call just female genitals pudendum, shameful. So the people who were originally coming up with anatomical nomenclature obviously had some issues around sexuality. So pudendal nerve, the shameful nerve, it's the nerve that's going to your genitals. And again, on a picture, if you see a nerve that's originating from the sacral region and then kind of just going down the back of the leg, you know it's the sciatic nerve. If you're looking at a nerve that's starting from the sacral region and just kind of loops right into the genital area, it's the pudendal nerve. So, in fact, give me a moment here. So I'm going to zip back to the other screen. Wait, no, that's not the one. Doobie-doo. let's see. Yeah, so if I go, there we go. So here we see coming out of the sacral region, this big honking thing, the sciatic nerve coming out down the, this is obviously posterior view. And it splits here, becomes the tibial nerve, which continues down, and this fibular nerve, which goes off to the side. Here we see the pudendal nerve is the little one that's coming here and going in into that region. So, you know, what you're going to want to do is, you know, spend time and kind of just and it's in your nerves to know. In fact, maybe I should bring that up. If I go into, let me go grab my doobie-doo in here. And I got, there we go. So let me go share this. So if I, let's see. Oh, this is not sharing right now, is it? Can you,
I see it.
do you see it?
I see cells and tissues.
Oh yeah, okay, that's good. Oh, there it is. So then we kind of go here, this nerves to know. So right in here, you know, this is just showing you which nerves you need to know. You know, think about which muscles they innervate and regions. You know, and for the cranial nerves, you also want to know, you know, I didn't spend that much time. Maybe I should be a little more explicit now about what exactly you need to, like for each of these, you need to know the number and the name. You should know if it's motor or mixed. You don't need to know the origin. Wonder if I can draw on this. I can. No, I can't. Don't worry about this stuff. Foramen of exit, you know, some of them, you know, for the olfactory nerve, you want to know it's through the cribriform plate. For the optic nerve, it should be the optic foramen. For the, you know, these ones, it's going to the eye muscles, it's a superior orbital fissure. But the other ones, don't worry. Actually, an auditory nerve, you already know, is that auditory meatus, the internally auditory meatus. And in terms of the function, don't worry about what specific muscles any of the cranial nerves are doing. Don't worry about, you know, carotid baroreceptors. You should know which ones are giving you the different special senses. You know, CN1 for special sense of smell, CN2 special sense of sight. Special sense of taste is going to be a mix: front of the tongue, facial, back of the tongue, glossopharyngeal, and then a little bit from the vagus. Special sense of hearing is going to be vestibulocochlear. But there's more detail on this drawing or on this chart than you need to know. So don't get hung up. So are there any questions? We covered a whole bunch of stuff. I think I'm still kind of getting the hang of figuring out how to work in this brave new world here. Are there any questions about any of the stuff we've been covering?
So in terms of the function of the cranial nerves, you want us to just know the general functions of the cranial nerves?
Yeah, I mean, you should know olfactory nerve is a special sense of smell. You should know optic nerve is a special sense of vision. Oculomotor were like 4 of the eye muscles: the superior, inferior, medial rectus, as well as the inferior oblique.
I mean, most of them are easier because not much, but some like trigeminal, glossopharyngeal,
Right. So for like
and
trigeminal, you should just know that it is sensory and motor from the face. So I wouldn't get into the more nitty-gritty details on that.
okay.
So any other questions or comments about any of this stuff?